welcome to another mentoring moment. I'm Dr. Berin Gilfillan, and we are looking at a series on the power principles of life. We all begin with the letter P, these principles, and I'm going to be looking today at the power of perspective. Now, another way to look at this is the power of optics. How does something look? This is something that our politicians have figured out, but it's something that all of us need to understand, is that how something comes across, how it looks, or how it's perceived by other people. You may say, well, I intended it to be that, but if it's not perceived accurately, it can be very damaging, can be very, very destructive. So the power of perception is extremely important. Now, I remember coming across this story. It was actually in the greatest stories never told, and it was an amazing story about the Second World War. And I'm just going to read it to you because how this one word was perceived actually changed the outcome of hundreds of thousands of lives. So I'm just going to read it to you. This is called Lost in Translation. By July of 1945, the war-weary Japanese government was ready to surrender when the cabinet first received unofficial word of the surrender terms laid out by the Allied leaders in what they call the Potsdam Agreement. They considered the terms lenient and were inclined to accept them, but they decided to withhold comment until they received the Allied ultimatums through official channels. So the Potsdam Agreement had already been drawn up. These were the terms of the end of war, and now these terms they were going to wait for these the official channels to deliver them. With that in mind, elderly Premier Kantoro Suzuki tried to tread a careful path when questioned about the Potsdam Declaration. Unfortunately, he used a word that has two meanings. He told a press conference that the cabinet was adopting a position of mokusatsu. That's the Japanese word. The word mokusatsu can mean withholding comment for the moment. It can also mean ignore. The Japanese news agency mistakenly misperceived it. They mistakenly translated it the second way. Radio Tokyo flashed the mistake to the world. Headlines in the United States blared that Japan was ignoring the declaration, rejecting the surrender terms. The results were nothing short of tragic. President Truman decided that he had no choice but to go ahead and drop the atomic bomb. More than 100,000 people were killed, and the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were virtually destroyed, in part because one old man chose one wrong word. And now, that was just an incredibly practical example how misperception, how people see things, how the public see things, how the world see things. And that's why the Bible says that we as Christians have to watch our testimony. We have to watch how we come across, how we are perceived by the world. And you may think, well, God just does his own thing and then the world's got to figure it out. But, you know, in the Old Testament, if you go back to Exodus when they were coming out of Egypt and Moses was standing before God and God wanted to destroy the nation. Moses said to God, "But God, well, what will the Egyptians say? How will they perceive this if you just wipe them out in the wilderness? They'll think you're not able to bring them into the promised land. Your name's going to be shamed." And this is a theme all the way through the Old Testament. God did not do a lot of things because of the way that people perceived it. And if you go even later on, even the book of Ezekiel, God says, "I'm going to give you a new heart and a new spirit." And he starts off the discourse in it's Ezekiel chapter 36. And he's like, "I'm not doing this because you're any good. I'm not doing this because he says, "You have shamed my name among the nations." He says, "I'm doing this for my own name's sake." I've got a name and a reputation to defend. And so God does it because of his own name. And we have to understand that how we're perceived as believers, the worst thing we can ever do is commit hypocrisy. People who see hypocrisy, it's a tremendously damaging thing to the name, not only of ourselves, but of God, because we represent him. So how we come across to others is extremely important. And there's a time in the Old Testament, in the book of Samuel, it's actually in 2 Samuel chapter 3, where David's general, which is Joab, kills Abner. He kills the enemy's general, but he kills him in a time of peace. And David had just made an agreement with him. David had just made a covenant with this guy, and Joab comes back in the camp, doesn't like him because he did something to his brother, and he takes him aside and he kills him. And David does so many things. It says in verse number 31, it says, David said to Joab and all the people who were with him, tear your clothes, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. And King David followed the coffin, and they buried Abner, and he cried out, he wept before them. And then it says, all the people then wept over him. When all the people came to persuade David to eat food, while it was still day, David took an oath, saying, God, do so to me, and more also if I taste bread or anything till the sun goes down. And then it says, all the people took note and pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased the people. For all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner the son of Ner. And so what David did here is he did some practical things to make sure that everybody understood that it was not his intent. And sometimes just the fact that it's not our intent to do something, or how we come across in terms of how we, conduct ourselves, in terms of, even the opulence sometimes that Christians will bring forward. Well, I can afford it and God bless me. But, how does the world perceive it? How do people see it? And God's interested in his name. He's interested in how he's perceived. He's interested that we carry him with grace. We carry him with dignity. We carry him with integrity. And how we come across does impact how people see God. So, perception is incredibly important. Just one word can make a huge difference. How we speak, how we act, all of these things, it's the optics of what we do. They are extremely important. The politicians have figured out, and we as the church need to understand, optics are important. So that's the timeless truth. Optics make a difference, optics count, and we need to do the optics right if we are to represent God. So until next time, that's your timeless truth. God bless you.